Hey, it's 2 o'clock in the East on Wednesday in New York City. It's 11 o'clock in California on Wednesday. It's time for Freedom Watch here at FoxNews.com. Judge Andrew Napolitano, in which we discuss the issues that profoundly affect your liberties, your civil liberties, your financial liberties, your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. We have a great show lined up for you today. We have a very, very interesting story about a very talented and courageous young man who was stopped by the TSA, the Transportation Safety Administration. You won't believe some of the questions they asked him. John Stossel, Ron Paul, Jerry Celente, Professor Tom Woods will all be here to talk about the latest developments on the national and the international scene that affect you and your freedom. Joining me now in the studio is Jerry Celente, who is a predictor of trends in the United States, a predictor of economic trends. What did you think when Peter Schiff predicted this nonsense and 3/4 of the economists laughed at him?
Well, we were in the same boat. We predicted this back in 2004. We predicted the recession of 2007. And in 2007, we took out the domain name, the Panic of '08. So we're in the same boat as Peter Schiff. We look at a lot of the same data and see it a lot in the same way.
Why is it that Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke, as recently as March of '08, said, this is a famous phrase from John McCain during the campaign, the fundamentals of the economy are strong.
Yeah.
And Hank Paulson even said, in my 35 years of banking, I have never seen the banking system so strong. So question, Jerry, I want to call you professor because you're like a professor, the way you write. You explain things so clearly and so cogently. Why is it that the people in charge of our money supply could have been so wrong, so close to doomsday?
I don't know if they were so wrong. I don't know what they really knew or what they really said. If they really came out and said how bad things are, there would have been a panic worse than the last panic. Or maybe they didn't know, like Robert Rubin said he didn't know, like Dick Cheney said he didn't know. Nobody could have seen it coming. There were people like myself, were the Peter Schiffs, but let's remember, Judge, that a lot of these people have a special interest in mind. When you look at the economists with a lot of the brokerages and banking firms, they have money on the line.
Well,
here.
Hank Paulson might have known that at the end of the Bush administration, he was hoping for some kind of a job back at Goldman Sachs. Is it any wonder that Lehman Brothers was allowed to go down and Goldman Sachs was forced to take TARP funds, whether they needed them or not?
Yeah, that's exactly it. When they had the AIG meeting, there was only one outsider that sat in on that meeting, outside the Fed and outside of the White House, and that was Lloyd Blankfein from Goldman Sachs. Hank Paulson, as you mentioned, he was the Treasury Secretary. Before that, he was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. Oh, and who's running AIG now for the government? Ed Liddy. Where's he from?
Allstate.
Goldman Sachs.
Originally, from the board of Goldman Sachs.
Exactly.
My good friend and college buddy, although I hate to say that because it was so long ago, John Stossel joins us now. This is Jerry Celente, whom I think you probably know,
Jerry. Nice to meet you.
Know of. And
we haven't met.
All right. Well, it's nice to have you
know
back.
of.
Nice to have you back, John. I appreciate it. We were just talking as you arrived, because Jerry is in the Peter Schiff school that predicted all this stuff before it happened. And I know you saw it coming as well. How could Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson, unless they had some alternative motivation, have said as recently as March of '08, the fundamentals of the economy are strong? I know McCain popularized that statement to the detriment of his campaign, but it actually came out of the mouth of Hank Paulson. And from Paulson, in my 35 years in banking, I've never seen the system as flourishing or as sound as it is now.
He said that? Well, everybody was saying, gee, those of you who didn't make these bets were suckers, and look how much money everybody else is making, and fundamentals are sound, even if lots of people are making reckless loans. Nobody knew. Why should they know? They're just fallible people. Might
they have had an ulterior motive? Is there a reason Goldman Sachs got money when it didn't need it, while Hank Paulson had that blank check we call TARP?
That sounds like a conspiracy to me. I mean, I think...
Well, it would be a conspiracy of one. It would be Hank Paulson feathering his own bed.
Clearly, Paulson was quicker to act and quicker to say we have to act because all his friends were calling him and saying, "We're getting killed here. I've lost all my money. You have to do something." And I don't profess to know as much as these guys do about monetary supply. But let me just make the point I was going to make. What I have learned in 40 years of reporting is the people closest to a scare are the first to panic. And panic wrecks everything, makes you make all kinds of bad decisions. Okay. The global warming researchers are the ones most panicked about global warming. The Y2K computer technicians were the ones most certain the planes are all going to crash. The bird flu doctors, the mad cow doctors, the people closest to it panic. If they're allowed to spend $1 trillion of your dollars, then we're in bigger trouble when they panic.
Might it have been better had the government done this bailout without saying the sky is falling, without undermining confidence? Listen, I'm against all the bailouts because I think they violate Economics 101. You can't get out of debt by borrowing. I also think they're unconstitutional. But from the government's point of view, might it have been a better strategy had they not said the sky is falling and just started helping some banks out?
I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times. I just pulled it out. October 16th, 1998. Following the long-term capital management bailout. It was the same story. They were too big to fail. And that's the fallacy of this whole mantra that they keep throwing out there. As John was talking about what went on before, let's look at the AIG bailout. What did we find out? Well, we found out a little bit of information that $13 billion went to Goldman Sachs, $12 billion went to Deutsche Bank, $12 billion went to Credit Suisse. Let's take a look at Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank's assets are $2.5 trillion.
All right, well, the money that went from AIG, was it legitimate insurance claims that these banks had on AIG?
But this is what John is saying, is that these guys called up, we're losing money. And that's what this bailout was about. Deutsche Bank isn't going to be in problems for losing $12 billion with $2.5 trillion. It's about them not losing money. That's what these bailouts are about. It has nothing to do with too big to fail. Show me the evidence.
Were you surprised that a Republican administration did the TARP? Or does George Bush really have no free market, individualistic roots?
I was more upset by Hank Paulson than George Bush. I don't know what George Bush believes, and I assumed Hank Paulson had some faith in the free market.
Do you know what George Bush's parting words were right near the end?
So we have to abandon capitalism
free
to
market.
save it?
Yeah, I've chucked free market principles. Oh, you did? The decider-in-chief?
He fought for Social Security private accounts.
But I'm just saying, he said this. But he said he chucked free market principles.
Well, he did.
The whole concept of the TARP is flawed because it presumes that you can get out of a problem caused by too much borrowing and spending by more borrowing and spending.
Exactly.
Which is absurd. It's still absurd to us. Why isn't it absurd to Hank Paulson? Is there a club, John?
It's most of America.
Is there a club in New York of bankers that know each other and will feather each other's nests even with federal dollars if they can?
Look what President Obama is saying.
All businesses will.
He's saying the program they want to put forward is to free up the credit markets so that banks could lend and people could borrow. And they call that normal. That's what got us into this. People have borrowed over their heads. We're $14 trillion in consumer debt. We're, $13 trillion now with all of these bailouts and stimulus programs and national debt. Right. And they're saying it's normal so that people could borrow, banks could lend, and people could borrow. This is a time for contraction.
I'm going to tell you a story. I was waiting for Tom Woods to get on. They're having a technical difficulty, and he'll be with us in just a minute. I was at a dinner last night in Washington, D.C., sitting next to a banker who was the chair and CEO of one of the 10 largest banking holding companies in the United States. They have $250 billion in assets. They have no bad debt of which they're aware. They didn't engage in any credit default swaps. They have no subprime mortgages, and they don't need any government assistance. He informed me that the FDIC and the Treasury came to him and said, if you don't issue a special class of stock just for us, which we can borrow, we will audit you publicly. It will cost you millions in employee time and in bad publicity and in